Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you are watching. My name is Dr. Victory Ekpin, and I am your host today. Welcome to another episode of the ACE podcast. This is where we discuss issues concerning the development space across the health sector, the education sector, and other development sectors. I'm so happy to have you here with us. We have other episodes out. Please feel free to go watch them, like, comment, subscribe, and to share with your friends and your colleagues if you find anything interesting. And I implore you to stay to the end. We're going to have a very important conversation today. So today we are going to be talking about an issue that is very important within the development space, and I'm sure that anyone that is working in the space will agree with me. It's around partnerships, forming partnerships between implementing partnerships with the government, partnerships with donors. These are issues that have come up time and time again as being very important in the space. And today the topic we are speaking on is from MOUs to measurable impact, how donors can design partnerships that actually deliver, right? And this is building on a conversation that we had earlier in the year during one of the ACE webinars, and where we talked about partnerships and we talked about setting up partnerships, how partnerships can be set up with shared accountability, with proper alignment, with good governance, and led by the government to make sure that partnerships actually work. We are going to be building on that today, and I am very excited to have two amazing colleagues in the room with me to build on that. These are colleagues who are not only here in their right as partners, as implementing partners in the space, but also as coordinators that coordinate multiple partners to achieve a goal. So to my right, I have Dr. Chukwunonso Nwaokorie, who is a principal at CEDA. And welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victory. Always a pleasure to join these conversations.
A fun fact, Dr. Nonso was also here with us to speak on partnership during the webinar. It's on our page. You can watch that as well. And I also have Zainab Saidu. She is an associate director at CHAI. This is someone that I admire a lot, and I think I met her first in December, and I read up so much about her. So thank you so much for being here, Zainab.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So going right into it, as I said, we are going to be speaking on something very important, partnerships. And I think I would want to start from the angle of, actually, we started talking about this a little bit outside, and I'm going to build off on that, right? From where you sit as both as partners and as coordinators, we've established the fact that a lot of the times there are partnerships. Partners are pulled together either by donors or by chance, in the sense that multiple apply for an RFP and different people win different aspects of it. Where do you think the breakdown starts from, such that multiple people are coming together to do work, and either there is acrimony in the middle, there is disagreement, or the impact is not actually seen at the end of the day? And what would you say, or where do you think that this breakdown starts from? I think I would start from Dr. Nelson.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Victory. Very thoughtful question, and as you said, we were chatting a bit about this just before we came in here, and I think where we landed was when you think of partnerships, there's a lot of similarity between establishing and running a team, and running or being a part of a partnerships. I mean, it's always so easy to start, from lofty ambitions, great goals, and just be like, oh, want to achieve this. And unfortunately, a lot of time, it then takes getting into it to then realize, like, okay, maybe we didn't have the same understanding, for example, or maybe we didn't understand how complex this was, and it's right there. As you asked, things start falling apart. Different understandings of the vision, different levels of commitment, to what it takes to achieve that vision. So I think that's really where it breaks down, because it's always so easy to kind of set the goal. But I think where you can start getting it right is if right from the beginning, you're really asking yourself some very tough questions about, okay, what exactly does it mean? This partnership wants that, what exactly does it mean? So that from the beginning, each person knows what the expectations are, and those expectations are the same that are used to kind of assess progress. And of course, bearing in mind that what you might have envisioned might be totally different. So you also need some level of flexibility, to adapt, to what you get. I feel like if you think of partnerships from the beginning with those critical aspects, I think you have a higher chance of succeeding than falling apart. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think you mentioned like the aspect of having a shared understanding from the beginning. Zainab, I don't know if you have any more.
Yeah, just to add on to what Nonso has said. So when we think about partnerships, you can look at it like an MOU, because an MOU is just the formalization of those partnerships, right?
Yeah.
And there are lots of buzzwords thrown in there: collaboration, joint accountability, and things like that. And there's almost so much pomp and pageantry to get that MOU or that partnership signed and sealed. But when it comes to delivery is where you begin to see all the bits and pieces not really aligning how you thought. And so the way I think about that is having some sort of operational translation, right? So as Nonso was saying, you need to get down to the uncomfortable questions. Who exactly is responsible for? What does that joint accountability start mean? Even if it's like, for example, it says Chai responsible for this, where in Chai? Who is particularly responsible for this in Chai? Within what timeline? What is required to get that delivered? So you find that there's so much to do to get to the partnership, but when is the execution, there's always a bit of a challenge. And you also want to think about, some partnerships are difficult for you to see the bigger impact. There's a lot of focus on the actual activities. And so, but at the end of the day, what we're looking at is really the impact.
Yeah.
And so we found out that because people are looking at activities, I've ticked off this box according to the work plan, I've trained X number of people, I've done X number of meetings, but you're not seeing the desired impact. What is the training resulting in? Are you really seeing in the improved service delivery? Are you seeing in better data quality? So I think those are some of the things you have to consider, and realize that partnerships, everybody brings their own strength, right? You may be known for doing it X, Y, Z, but there's a different way in doing it. And so you have to have that open. You have to come in with, like, you drop all your expectations at the door and be ready to learn new things, learn new ways of doing things, share your own experience, and be able to build upon what's already there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you've spoken about going down to the nitty-gritty, like going to who is doing what, when, why, and you also spoke about some of the accountability. Dr. Nwaokorie also spoke about accountability. So I'm now thinking about before we even go to talk about from the donor coordinating aspect, how do partners hold partners accountable? Because, like, for example, except if it's from an angle of we are subgranting from SIDA, if we are working on, let's say we have a co-lead situation, how do you hold the other partner accountable? Is this something that you experienced? And from your experience, maybe you can tell me from your experience how that's worked.
I see that you came with the hard questions today. Yeah, but I think it's also maybe like picking up from where Zainab stopped. Accountability first even starts with documentation. Actually writing down what we're going to do. Sometimes it could be formalized with an MOU, a teaming agreement, a partnership agreement, all sorts of, agreements. But even if the two parties don't feel it's necessary to maybe, have a formalize it. At the very least, it should be documented and everybody can see it, and every once in a while, they should go back to it and be like, is this, like, what we have now? Is this what we have, what we're doing? But also, like, some of the things Zainab said, like, even now spelling it out, specifically with your work plan, with your indicators that you use to track progress over time. I think that's really how you establish accountability. But maybe there's also the bit of just brutal honesty, just not being afraid to step on toes, because, partnership is really two very different entities, and even within those entities you have individuals. So, like, there's a lot of I forget the physics or chemistry term. There's just a lot of movement. There's a lot of movement there. So the chances that it could go wrong are always going to be there. But I feel if everybody comes in with that mindset of an open mind, as Zainab has said, also appreciate that, okay, maybe my way of doing things is not the only right way of doing things, and just kind of like, let's even see if we're hitting the results. I think that mindset also is very critical, to accountability. Yeah.
Thank you. So, and then I'll throw this back to you, but from the angle of, I know that in your role, you've also been coordinating a lot of partners, not just working on the same level. But I want you to look at it from the two lenses. How do you hold a partner accountable, even when it's not like a sub-grantee relationship? It's that each people are working, let's say, on two different aspects. Let's say their dependencies.
Working towards a common goal.
Yes, a common goal. Maybe something depends on them for you to be able to do your work. Is it something you've experienced? And when it did not work, how did you handle that situation? So look at it from that lens. Also from the lens of, how do you hold your sub-grantees accountable while maintaining that, Dr. Nosos talks about the fact that people are different, like the teams are different, just like people are different. And there are some nuances you have to hold while holding people accountable, just to make sure that the whole system does not break down. How do you navigate that level of...
Yeah. So I think so. For sub-agreements, I think those are slightly easier, because sub-agreements are things you have to spell out every little detail, right? There have to be meetings, you write a narrative, there are timelines, there are deliverables, there are things which they have to, and so it's easier to sign, because especially because it's within a very specific time frame, right?
Yeah.
And so you also need to make sure that the person who you're sub-granting to understands what it is you're trying to achieve at the bigger picture. Because in most cases, it's just a piece of the pie, of the puzzle. It's not the entire picture.
Yeah.
So they also need to understand the bigger picture of how what they're doing contributes to the overall goal, right? So I think for me, I found that to be very, very helpful. And also having check-ins with them, right? But the bigger piece, or the more difficult piece, is for an organization who is not accountable to you, or you're not accountable to, but you have joint deliverables. This is where your stakeholder management skills come in. Like, there's nothing, it's really about, as an individual, how do you manage stakeholder? Your organization has its policies, it has its directives, you all have your mandates, you're working towards the same goal. But you also realize that even if it's put on paper, the delivery of how that request is met has a number of things. It's always good to have, agreements, which are found from the get-go. Have a meeting where you all agree on the reporting structure, the coordinating structure, who takes accountability. It seems like a very simple thing, but at the end of the day, Dr. Nwaokorie said, just documenting, it doesn't have to be signed, but documenting and who's responsible for what. But I see that definitely stakeholder management has a lot to do with things like that, because I can't ask a co-lead in an organization who is also his own boss to report to me. Do you understand? But you have to know how to manage that, because we're all working towards the bigger picture, right? And most of the work that we do, in fact, all the work we do at Development Partners, keys into supporting the government. It doesn't matter whether you're in the private sector, because the government is responsible for the people, both in the private and the public sector, which most people seem to forget.
Yeah.
We focus more on the public sector work, but the government is responsible for all the citizens. So even if you're in the private sector, right, you still have to make sure that there is that understanding, there is that connect. What are we working towards? How can we ensure that at the end of the day, both our organizations achieve what they want, the government gets what it wants, and then our funders are also happy. So it's a lot of, moving pieces. But I found in my case, that's clearly documenting what you want and very good stakeholder management skills. Yeah, sometimes you have to take a step back to take 2 steps forward.
If I could just right on that, because that, as you asked that question, I felt like that government involvement is a very critical piece, especially in that kind of scenario where the other partner is not beholden to you. So I feel the principle of a sector-wide approach, which is what this current administration is pushing, I feel like it's a very critical practice that we should even kind of like normalize. It should be like second nature for everybody that is working in the space, and I feel like it helps bring in partners who have that common goal but might not even be aware. So I feel if from the beginning you already reach out to government to share your plans, that also kind of takes advantage of that bird's eye view that government has to then kind of like fit it into the larger plan, and then align it with what other partners are doing, but most importantly help in that joint accountability that involves government and every partner that is playing within that space.
Thank you so much. So some of the things I've heard is it's very easy for accountability to become diffuse, right? Even when we have things on paper, even when we've written down the structure. So there is now the part of one thing, stakeholder management, managing the stakeholders, and then the second thing, that coordination from that government coordination, or that's, I don't want to say higher body because it's not like a church, but that's coordination, yes, from that level, such that it's not only two partners that are not necessarily accountable to each other, but they're accountable to the goal and to to the government, or that coordinated structure. It could be a technical working group or something within the government and the rest. Yeah, so these are some things I have heard. And just to speak to our audience, please drop a comment if there is any more thing you think that should be done, and like, subscribe, share, and drop a comment. So I think I want to shift now the lens towards our angle. You know, we talked about this as well. We've talked about partnerships between partners, bilateral partnerships, if I would use that word. Now let's talk about as a donor, or donor partnerships, and also donor partnerships. We are going to be looking at our donors and looking at what we think could amount to better partnerships between the implementing partners that our donors put together. What are the most consequential mistakes that you think are currently ongoing within the space that leads to a breakdown in partnership, so that we don't achieve our goals, or we achieve our outputs, but the outcomes are not seen, and as well as the impact? Let's look at it in terms of both from the beginning, from the inception, from bringing together partners down to getting the accountability structures from partners, and how partners are managed and within the space as a whole. Zainab?
So I think in my head I see like three red flags which are very common in these kind of MOUs with the donors, partners, and the governments, right? One thing is being very heavily reliant on activities versus outcomes. It's very heavy on how many trainings have been conducted, as I said earlier, how many meetings, how many things have been procured, but you don't really see what those outcomes are in terms of some of those documentation, because those come later on down the line, right? So that's one thing that's always a challenge. Second thing which I found is really data sharing. So there always are data sharing agreements, but data is something that's very critical, right? The Nigerian government takes a very serious stand on data. The data belongs to the government, right? And so the government needs to be part of that data design process. You can't design something that has to do with the data without the government from the get-go. Yes, Johnson, it's really not the ideal way to go. Right down from, designing the data collection to getting the ethical approval, designing what facilities to go to, the data points to collect, how the data is analyzed, all that should be really centered around the government. They have the Bureau of Statistics for things like that, doing the analysis. But we find that it's now become a case where partners are almost more set up to do the deeper analysis, and you find that the data tends to lie more with the partners than with the government. And so that for me is like a real red flag in most of the agreements that we currently have. You find that at the end of the day, the government owns the outputs rather than the actual raw data to make informed decisions going different lines. And I think another thing which is like a red flag is the timing, just the reality. People really want to see results. But true system strengthening change takes a long time. It takes 3 to 5 years, and you have a 1-year grant to do X, right? You're not really going to see those system strengthening results, right? So once your partnership agreement is set up like that already, I think you're already setting it up in a way that you could check off on your activities, but the bigger picture is something that you may not be able to deliver on within the required period for something that should be sustained, and strengthen the system for a long time. Yeah.
So I think you've now brought me to the angle of sustainability, how okay, maybe I would let also speak on this issue. Where do you think the breakdown is with regards to the way we design current MOUs and partnerships with donors and with the government?
Yeah. I think it's definitely, what we'll say on this podcast will definitely not be exhaustive. I think Zainab has touched on some, but I think some that come to mind are situations where the partners themselves are not even involved in the design or creation of the partnership, you know. And I kind of understand that sometimes that's inevitable for, you know, different reasons, but I think it can always be fixed, you know, if right from the beginning, sometimes dedicated to actually sitting down to design, rather co-design, you know, that partnership and how it's going to be. Still thinking about like co-creation, I think one of the common pitfall I've seen, and I remember, you know, back then, I'm not going to mention the project it was on, but I always found myself telling, you know, the donors that I'm not sure we're speaking the same language with the government. You know, we seem to have our own objectives and, you know, they seem to have theirs, and we're just not talking to each other. You know, but it's even talking about like even co-creating the solution with the government, which I feel like for us these days, I see that it's now second nature. That's how we design, and I think a lot of people also in the space, you know, are beginning to pick that up. But you do still see instances where, you know, somebody somewhere would come up with a solution, just, you know, take it to the state and just be like, yes, you know, this is what we want to do. And sometimes it flies, sometimes the results are not so great. But I think it's definitely something that that we need to take into cognizance. I think one other bit is, and maybe Zainab kind of touched on it a bit, but just to emphasize that lack of flexibility, you know. So she described it as focusing on outputs, tasks, and all. But I think similar to that is a lot of times we come into the design, the implementation with our assumptions, and we stay married to those assumptions without necessarily reevaluating that, okay, exactly. Yeah, you even need to always ask yourself, were my initial assumptions even right to start with? You know, just even
the donors.
exactly. So so us in this context is like development partners, donors, and government. We all need to be like flexible and understand that, okay, yeah, we had a great plan, a great strategy, but now the reality on ground is, you know, very different. Yeah.
We also know, so just add on that, a lot of times we actually come in with assumptions that we know what the clients want. And when you realize midway, like, no, we need to have a client-centered approach, then you now go back and course correct and sit with the clients and try to redesign your program around it. So I think the point is just being able to be flexible and adaptable to make sure that you do get to the end goal that you want, even if the activities you had designed initially are not going to remain the same. Yeah.
And I think to add on to that, or to speak back on what also mentioned, this swap, that basket fund or baskets co-creation and everything, like when you spoke about co-creating from the beginning, that is what systems or setups like swap is for. But I don't know how much. I think it's picking up and it's being utilized right now, but I don't know how much across the different sectors, because as you said, there are still some pockets of innovations that come into the country, and then you as a Nigerian within the space will sit and look at it and say, there is no way this can work. And has this actually gone through the system? Has this actually gone through what has been set up, the swap system that has been set up? And oftentimes I'm like, I don't know. But it now begs the question, how dicey, or the relationship between like the donors and when they come into, it's a little bit dicey, because they said he who pays the piper? No, not exactly that, but yes, I'm trying to be politically correct. But how do we navigate that relationship, or how do partners, like when I'm talking about now the grantees, how do we navigate the relationship or the ability to tell the donors this can't work, or this won't work, or this is not this, we are not going to be able to achieve our goal for this in 2 years. Can we have can we modify our goals? Can we modify what we plan to do, or can we have something that's more sustainable within the system? How have you, because I know that these are things that you guys have done, how have you been able to navigate those conversations such that we still get the funding because we need it, but we are doing what would work or what we think can work?
Yeah. Victory with the tough questions again. I think it's still back to one of the things I mentioned earlier, which is that brutal honesty. Because, you know, when we talk about partnerships, I think in the webinar we kind of discuss it as, you could look at it as different types, maybe within one ecosystem. So sometimes it's development partner to development partner, development partner to government, but also development partner to donor. And I feel like in that instance, or indeed with respect to your specific question, it's also that brutal honesty. Like, because for me, and I think for most of the people, or all the people I work with, we first of all see ourselves as Nigerians. first and foremost. And it's really about, okay, this might be nice on paper, but is it going to work? Is it really going to help us? Like, are we going to be happy that we were part of this, investment, and it didn't yield results for Nigerians, our fellow Nigerians? So I feel like when you understand and have that sense of responsibility, and you then know that you just need to be brutally honest, and sometimes you should even be able to, or you might have to just even walk away from some conversations. It's not just about the investment or the money; it's about results and your integrity. Also, you should be able to do your work and go home and sleep well at night. Yeah, so I think that brutal honesty is a very critical ingredient, and development partners should not shy away from being brutally honest, even with their donors. Yeah.
Zainab, you did mention, like, it's not just about signing the MOUs. So what do you think? Like, outside the MOUs, it's not just to get the signature paper and say, "Yay, we are doing this." How do we make sure we are? Yeah.
So I've also we know that there are development partner coordination platforms that exist with the government, right? So they are different from, as also said, partners to donors and partner to partner. The donors actually do engage with the government. So they do know, like, with the swaps and all. So they know what the challenges are. They know what the government's priorities are. They know where the focus needs to be. And everybody's just trying to make sure that, we align as much as possible, because each organization still has its mandate. So it trickles down the same way. So even if as an organization, we're very government focused. It's one of our key values. We work strengthening of government systems. So if there is a funding opportunity that does not align with your own mandate as an organization, it's not really about that activity. How do you make sure that you bring out the bigger picture? If there needs to be more conversations with pointing the donors to those partners to get a different lens, and saying, okay, yes, we seem to be missing these 2, 3, 4 pieces, and then directing them, and then going back to say, now we've had those conversations, how are you now more open to revising what it is you wanted to achieve, or how you wanted to achieve that? That's what we found to be extremely helpful for us. But as I said, there are some times where you just look at some funding opportunities and you're like, we have the things you want to be held accountable for, and this doesn't really fit within our mandates, and sometimes you just have to take a step back.
So even when it's hard and you feel, oh, this is something that would be a great opportunity for the organization, but yeah, what would it be like at the end of the day? Our integrity is on the line, and then you walk away. I really like that within the development space, we are still able to choose what we want to stamp our name on. And I think I would want to, just to round up the conversation, to go towards your roles as coordinating bodies, as people that coordinate other partners, because there are some work that you do where you involve a lot of other partners. And I want to talk about the selection process. Maybe this may help other partners that are on the call. What do you consider when selecting partners to work on different projects? Zainab, you mentioned that sometimes people are working on different pieces so there is a whole, and the people are working on different pieces. When selecting the people to work on the different pieces, is there any consideration about who is working on this, and so that should affect who is going to work on this, or is often just about the technical competence? What actually goes into that selection process, and how can people, other partners, development partners that are watching us, that may be listening to us, take that back to determine how they position themselves and stuff like that for better partnerships?
Mr. I'll go first. So I think really there's no one straight answer. It depends on what you're doing. So definitely technical expertise is very key, right? You need to make sure that whoever you are engaging is technically capable to deliver on what you want within the timeline. So these have a clear understanding. But what I've also found very helpful is that Nigeria is extremely diverse. The specificities you think about engaging in the North will be different from the South. There are religious considerations, there are political will considerations, there are program considerations. If you're looking at a program which is community-led, engaging a certain cohort of people, you want people who are already embedded in that system. And so in that case, you're looking at local organizations who fit within the grassroots, right? Who are closer to the people. You don't want somebody sitting in Abuja and telling you they are doing a community engagement program in Enugu State. It's not going to work. You need people on the ground in Enugu State who wouldn't also tell you that, oh, I couldn't go to that LGA because it was far. No, the person is already in that LGA. They understand the norms, the cultures, the systems. So that also comes to balance in terms of making sure that that is a good fit for the actual system. Then I've also found that as much as everything, you also want to be fiscally responsible to your funder, right? So who can give you the best value for money? There are a number of things that come into consideration. But I think key is that an organization that also understands our core mandate of working with the service of government, right? So even if you're doing that in Enugu State with the LGA, you must engage with the government's health promotion officer. You must engage with the government's M&E officer. You can't do those things as an individual and think you can, report on that, give us our report, and at the end of the day, it still must be engaged with government, domiciled with government. So those are the things that we take into consideration when we think about who we engage to do subcontracts and who can help us carry out activities where we don't have a physical presence.
Yeah, I think I can attest to that because it's something that we, in the recent work that we just did, which it was something that was key, like working with government, and no matter how much headache we had to make sure that we were fully aligned. So, Dr. Nonso, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything Zainab has said, but I think also it's good to remember that you always have to take the context, into view, right? Because it's the partnerships might come about from different contexts. As I mentioned earlier, in some instances, you might literally be told by a donor that, okay, we know you can do this, but we need you to partner with this person, for whatever reason. So that's good to note. But I think it's the typical things. They are capabilities, and I would dare say demonstrable capabilities, not just on paper, always trying to test to say, okay, has this person really demonstrated this before? And not just capabilities, but even impact. And if this question is really for the benefit of maybe younger or smaller organizations that are coming up, I think it's important for them to know that right from the get-go, they need to be thinking of impact, because it's when you actually touch people's lives that, people kind of talk about you. In fact, my former CEO, used to believe very strongly that we didn't need any advertising as long as we did impactful work. So, and I feel like that should be everybody's ethos, in this business.
Gen Z generation.
I have faith in the Gen Z generation.
Once your beneficiary knows you, you've really delivered on your project. That's it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, okay, maybe I'm going to digress a little bit, but the current generation is all about you must put yourself out there, you must be loud, you must be out, which is very uncomfortable for me, but
so I know we're digressing, but I think it's a worthy digression because this is also one of my favorite topics, talking about the generations. I actually love the Gen Zs because I feel like despite, all the things that we say about them, they're actually quite innovative. So even if the motive is because you don't want to stress yourself, but you figure out a smarter, faster way to solve it.
I like that.
But even the part of like celebrating yourself, that was what our former CEO used to say. But I think we also then learned and became wiser that we should always focus on impact, but we should also tell our story. Because if you don't, I'm sure there's some African proverb that describes something like this. But if you don't, tell your story, somebody else will tell it, and so I think the Gen Zs are right on that one.
But yes, still I agree that like your work can speak for you. Yes. So thank you very much. So to round off the entire conversation, I would want to talk about sustainability, just a little point on sustainability. Sustainability within all the different types of partnerships you mentioned, right? The development partner to development partner, the development partner to donor. Then I'm even looking at the sustainability in the angle of the government, because I think the government plays a key role in sustainability of partnerships and sustainability of the outcomes, right? So how can donors as well as development partners look at partnerships to incorporate long-term sustainability of that project? Not such that it's not that after the funding is gone, or even if the funding is gone, it lasts another 2 years, and then boom, nothing is heard about it anymore. How do we make sure that this is incorporated? I was looking at you, Sophie.
Thanks. I think another excellent question. I think it's still some of the things we've mentioned, co-designing with the government right from the beginning, but also things like trying as much as possible to align what you're trying to achieve with what is the government's priority. Because I feel like sustainability is equal to ownership and the availability of resources. If you're trying to simplify it or explain it to a 2-year-old, it's really, if I leave, would this person be so bothered enough about this to actually keep it going? Which is kind of easy if it was already their priority or their area of interest ahead, but also the resources, which is also why you then need to look at, okay, what is available, or what is even planned down in the resources, what's in the annual operational plan, what's in the medium term plan, and so on, and then make sure what you are doing keys into that, because then you have a higher chance of the government being able to fund it, even if there's no donor there to fund it when the funding stops. Yeah.
Yeah. So making sure that we have the government alignment, both in terms of the plan, the government plan. I think it still takes us back to the swap thing, yes, and also making sure they're aligned in terms of resources. So I don't know, Zainab, if there's any.
Yeah, I mean,
addition.
building on swap, one budget, one plan, one
Yes.
voice, one. Yeah, I think yes. But I think you also need to be very realistic in kind of projects you execute. Not all projects are meant to be sustainable, right? Some projects are like assessments and they are short term. Yes, some are pilots for you to just for you to identify what you need to design for a long term sustainability project. But for something that is sustainable, as Nonso has said, like those are all the key elements. But you also need to identify efficiencies, right? There's the government already has so many structures set up. There's no need to introduce duplication. There's just key into what already exists, and then see how you can take it a little bit further. So it's not just getting it on the AOP. Dot all the lines, cross all the T's. That AOP, is there actually a budget line to ensure that, there's some things you just have to do to make sure you a little push, write a memo, make sure this thing is institutionalized before you just say that you want to step back and see it go on without you. So it can be simple things like, for example, Chai used to hold a meeting with the government every quarter to review XYZ. But as the project goes on, the government is now the one that says, we are ready to be hosting this. We call for the people. That is sustainability, because the government has taken that ownership of that. And so they see it as something that belongs to them. It's no longer a Chai activity. It's no longer a Solina activity. It's a government activity. It's a priority. We've owned this. So you can look at your sustainability wins with simple, low-hanging fruits like that. And also looking at the bigger picture of 2, 3, 4 years down the line. Are you seeing the impact? Because those activities have been rolled into the AOPs and they have been added onto the government work plans, and those are also things that government can tell partners that come in, say, this is our work plan for the year. If you have new funding, you must key into these things that we have already established and support us to ensure that it continues on post your grant. So those are some of the key factors for sustainability.
I really like that last point. That there was a time I was really trying to push when I was back in Aquabim. I was really trying to push, like, we have to have a list of priorities, right? And nobody should just come in and do but of course it's still very dicey, because I remember then told me, like, yes, while we have our list of priorities, sometimes people come with their list of money and say what they want already. So yeah, that's but I agree.
Exactly. I can let you do this, but you have to do this.
Also do this.
Yes. So it's good for them to have a list of things.
But what I find even interesting about it is, like, if you think about it, I don't think swap is new per se. It's just really reinforcing what should have been government's role in the first instance. And unfortunately, the fact that a lot of the healthcare in Nigeria or in sub-Saharan Africa is donor-led, I feel like that's kind of made government over time forget its role. But I think now with swap, but even just some of the realities within the space, there's a bit of a learning curve. But I feel like gradually governments are kind of like understanding their rights a bit better and a bit more insistent on what are their priorities. Yeah.
I think you just took that from my head, Dr. Naso, because the next thing I was going to ask is a hard question to say how does, so a lot of the times with the programs that we do, for example, that is, by the time you are, let's say, pulling out, or the funding is gone and everything, and it's time for the government to take over, or there is a transition period, you can already see that this is going to struggle, or this is going to suffer, because there is a slow, or there's very limited ownership, or there is ownership, but it's still a you thing. So I had wanted to ask, how then do we get the government, knowing the government that we work with, and the fact that working with the government is a little bit dicey in that they have a lot of power and interest, and you have to pacify is not the word, but you have to make sure that you align with the government, no matter what that looks like. So sometimes it is difficult. Sometimes we all know it could be difficult. So I had wanted to ask, how, when pulling out of programs, final question, do you navigate maybe the government being on maybe a little bit on the laid back side, or not taking that as important, even when it was their idea or their push from the beginning, and making sure that there is continuity, even though the government is interested, they don't let it go, what has been built maybe over 5 years? Yeah, that's my last hard question.
Yeah, I think it's enough hard questions for the day.
let me try to attempt to respond to that. So I think the truth about sustainability is that if you don't build a sustainability plan from day one, you are going to struggle when you're transitioning. You cannot have a 5-year plan and say, in year 4, I want to start doing sustainability transitioning. It's not going to work. You have to build it in from day one, right? And what I've also found is that, I mean, as much as we say government, your definition of sustainability is different. I don't think government needs to do every single thing you used to do on that project for it to be sustained. Because for you as a partner, you may have taken up duplicative roles to the government in terms of getting someone to do data collection, getting someone to do supervision, but those are structures that exist in the system. So if you just need to add on to what the M&E officers do in terms of when they collect the data, they look at A, B, and C. It's an easier ask than telling them to engage a whole different person to do X, Y, Z. So being very deliberate about identifying what are the areas that you can integrate into the already existing government structure that don't require them to get more resources, right? Because that's always a challenge. Resources are very limited. That doesn't require the government to get more resources. It doesn't require them to get more personnel. Those are things I think you can easily transition, right? And then, as you said, stakeholder management is very important. Still making sure you get that buy-in. You need to have some sort of champion when you're doing this, right? Either it's the RH coordinator or the FP coordinator or the HIV focal person. Like, somebody has to champion this cause, and they must believe in it because it aligns with their government mandate. So once it doesn't align, then it's a very hard sell to get someone to do that. Do you understand? But once it does, then you find that it's an easier, and when really just being deliberate about what can be transitioned and what can't.
Yeah.
I think Zainab is spot on. It's really thinking about being intentional about it from day one. You know, not waiting till the end to figure out who's going to pick it up, and also just being realistic. It doesn't have to be done exactly the way you did it. But I think, you know, kind of how you then get there is from day one, you're also aware that your role is not just to deliver results or provide technical assistance. Your role is also to build the capacity, you know, of government, you know, which is why it's always advisable when you are planning, you know, any new project or something, you are literally asking yourself on each piece, who is my government counterpart? So if you have an M&E guy on your team, he needs to be interacting with his government counterparts. If it's a supply chain thing and you have somebody focusing on that person needs to be, you know, engaging with his government counterpart and then teaching them not the process or tactical thing, but first of all, like what we're trying to solve, how to problem solve together, so that even when you are not there with your fancy tools and, you know, a lot of analytical capacity, he or she will be able to recreate, you know, whatever is the objective and do it in their own way and get results. I think it's really about that intentionality, but also along the line, you know, deliberately building and transferring capacity to the government. I think that's one critical piece to add.
Thank you very much. So what I've gotten from there is that you can't go into somebody's house and enter their kitchen and start cooking without their buy-in, without their permission. And apart from permission, you want them to start to cook after you are gone. You want them to know how to cook. So they have to be there. They have to be watching. They have to cook as well. Maybe they may not be able to do the Michelin star thingy, but they are looking at the cooking. And then when you go, they can make the porridge plantain, even though they are not putting the like leaf on top and the sprinkles. Do you understand?
But you need to understand why you are putting what you are putting exactly.
Yes. So thank you so much. This has been a rich conversation, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this conversation and that you've taken a lot. We went around many different angles. We looked at partnerships in terms of alignment and accountability. Then we looked at partnerships in terms of having partnerships with donor development partners and donors, and how that selection process can be improved. And we also looked at coordinating partners. I keep calling you coordinating partners because I don't know how else to describe it. Like people that have large funds that maybe not very large funds, but funds that they can get, that they have to engage multiple partners. I don't know how to call it.
I mean, we're just implementing partners, right?
Implementing partners, still implementing partners, yes. And so we've looked at it from many different angles, and something that has come out very clearly is the importance of alignment with the government from the get-go, the importance of the government also owning their role as that coordinating partner, right? Making sure that everybody is plugging in rather than running their own parallel structure. And development partners, the power of development partners to actually also how do I put this now? We have development partners to determine what's happened, because we have the on ground experience. We know what's happening, and we can say, I think this is not going to work. I think this is going to work. Sitting down with the government to say this is, I think this is how we should go. So it's a whole ecosystem, and the partners plug in. But something that has come out is there must be accountability, and then the importance of the execution, the step-by-step process of the execution. The MOU, signing the MOUs at the beginning, as we've established, can be very flashy. That's what the time we see the news. There has been an MOU signed between this and this, and then they have this amount of money and they're going to do this amazing thing. And at the end of the day, what does the execution of that amazing thing look like? That is very important, and that's very key. And those are some things we've talked about today, building on what we talked about in our webinar. So again, I want to say thank you so much to our guests, Zainab, Dr. Nonso. It's a pleasure having you here. I feel so honored to be the one hosting this. In case you don't know, these are my chiefs and my ogas. And I am here hosting this. Who am I? But,
Very much for having us.
Thank you so much. Again, my name is Dr. Victory. Thank you for joining the ACE podcast. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. Feel free to check out Zainab and Dr. Noso on LinkedIn and follow them, and follow ACE as well. We're so glad to have you here, and we will expect you on the next episode of our podcast. Bye.